The thunder rolled across the Montana sky like a warning as Tabitha Davis clutched her sodden wedding dress, running barefoot through the mud toward the only shelter visible in the gathering darkness, a weathered barn standing sentinel against the violent summer storm of 1875. Her chestnut hair, once elaborately pinned for what should have been the happiest day of her life, now hung in wet tangles around her tear-streaked face. The barn door groaned in protest as Tabitha pushed against it, her trembling hands barely mustering enough strength. Inside, the scent of hay and horses filled her nostrils. The relative quiet, disturbed only by the drumming of rain on the roof, provided an immediate, if temporary, relief from the downpour. Tabitha sank against a stack of hay bales, her wedding dress a beautiful creation of white satin, and lace that had been her mother's now ruined with mud and tears. She'd run away. Left Thomas Fleming at the altar, the man her father had practically sold her to in exchange for clearing his gambling debts. Fleming was 30 years her senior, with cold eyes that had looked at her as though she were merely another possession to add to his collection. At 20 years old, Tabitha had refused to be traded like cattle, regardless of her father's rage or the scandal it would cause. Tabitha huddled deeper into the shadows of the barn as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. This place belonged to someone, perhaps even someone who knew her father or Fleming. She needed to stay hidden, at least until she could formulate a plan that extended beyond blind panic and desperate flight. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the weathered boards of the barn with renewed fury. Tabitha's teeth chattered as she hugged her knees to her chest, trying to conserve what little warmth remained in her body. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her freeze, pressing herself further into the shadowed corner. The barn door swung open with force, allowing a tall figure to enter, leading a magnificent chestnut stallion. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the man's features' strong jaw dusted with stubble, broad shoulders, and a cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. Water cascaded from his duster as he removed it, hanging it on a nail protruding from one of the barn posts. "Easy, Thunder," the man soothed his horse, his voice a deep, gentle rumble that somehow managed to be heard over the storm. "That's some weather out there, isn't it, boy?" Tabitha held her breath, trying to make herself as small as possible. If the man discovered her, he might return her to her father or worse, to Fleming directly. The horse suddenly snorted, turning its head toward her hiding place. "What is it?" the man asked, following the direction of his horse's gaze. He reached for a lantern hanging from a beam, striking a match to light it. The warm glow spread through the barn, inevitably reaching the corner where Tabitha had tucked herself away. "Lord Almighty," he breathed, taking a step back. "Who are you?" Tabitha considered lying, but something in his expression, surprise rather than threat, made her hesitate. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I mean no harm, I just needed shelter from the storm." The man approached slowly, as though she were a spooked horse. The lantern light revealed kind green eyes set in a handsome, weathered face. He couldn't have been more than 26 or 27. "You're wearing a wedding dress," he observed, his brow furrowing. "Are you lost?" "Not lost," Tabitha replied, finally finding her voice. "Running away." His eyebrows rose, but to her surprise, no judgment crossed his features. Instead, he set the lantern on a nearby barrel and shrugged out of his flannel shirt, leaving him in a simple undershirt. He held the dry flannel out to her. "Take this. You're shaking something fierce." Tabitha hesitated before accepting the offering. "Thank you, Mr. Grant Yates." He gave a small, almost shy smile. "And you are Tabitha Davis," she replied, wrapping the oversized shirt around her shoulders. It smelled of pine, tobacco, and something indefinably masculine. "I should tell you that people might come looking for me." Grant nodded slowly. "Guessing you weren't too keen on saying I do," a bitter laugh escaped her. "My father arranged the marriage to settle a debt. I was expected to marry a man old enough to be my father, a man who—" She shuddered. "I couldn't do it." Grant's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Can't say I blame you, he glanced toward the barn door. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. My ranch house is just beyond that ridge. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Tabitha stiffened. I couldn't impose. Miss Davis, you're welcome to stay here in this drafty barn, but I'd feel a mite inhospitable knowing you caught your death of cold when I have a perfectly good spare room. My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, would have my hide if she knew I left a lady in distress. There was something about Grant Yates, a gentle steadiness, an absence of that predatory gleam she'd become accustomed to seeing in men's eyes that made Tabitha nod. Very well, Mr. Yates, I accept your kind offer. Grant smiled, the expression transforming his face. Let me finish settling thunder and we'll make a dash for it. Tabitha watched as he efficiently removed the saddle from his horse, brushed him down, and provided feed and water. His movements were sure and practiced, his murmured words to the animal affectionate. When he'd finished, he retrieved his duster. It's not much, but it'll keep you a bit drier, he said, holding it out. Wearing Grant's flannel shirt and now his duster, Tabitha followed him into the storm. The rain was relentless, and despite the protective clothing, she was soaked through again by the time they reached the modest but well-maintained ranch house. A welcoming light glowed from within. As promised, a woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun awaited them. Her eyes widened at the sight of Tabitha. Good heavens, Grant Yates, what have you brought home this time? Grant gave a sheepish smile. Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Tabitha Davis. She needs shelter for the night. The older woman's expression softened as she took in Tabitha's bedraggled appearance and ruined wedding dress. You poor dear. Come in, come in. Let's get you out of those wet things. An hour later, Tabitha sat at a sturdy kitchen table, wrapped in a borrowed nightgown and robe belonging to Mrs. Winters, with a thick blanket around her shoulders. Her hair had been gently toweled and braided by the housekeeper's capable hands, and a bowl of hearty stew sat before her. Grant sat across the table, his own bowl already emptied. You should eat, he encouraged. Mrs. Winters makes the best venison stew in all of Montana Territory. Tabitha took a tentative spoonful, then another with more enthusiasm as the rich flavors burst on her tongue. It's wonderful, she said sincerely, earning a pleased nod from Mrs. Winters. Now then, the housekeeper said, sitting down with her own bowl, perhaps you'd like to tell us what brought you to our barn on your wedding day. Tabitha's spoon clattered against the bowl. She looked between Grant's kind eyes and Mrs. Winters' concerned expression, and found herself spilling the entire story: her father's gambling debts, Thomas Fleming's proposition, and her desperate flight from the church when she couldn't go through with the ceremony. Fleming owns half the businesses in Willow Creek, Tabitha finished. He'll be furious. My father will be worse. Grant and Mrs. Winters exchanged a look. You can stay here tonight, Grant said firmly. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. I couldn't impose. Nonsense, Mrs. Winters interrupted. This house has plenty of room and you clearly need a safe place. Fleming's reputation precedes him, and not favorably. The storm raged on outside, but within the cozy kitchen, Tabitha felt a tentative sense of safety for the first time in months. The following morning dawned clear and bright, as though the storm had never happened. Tabitha woke disoriented in an unfamiliar bed before remembering the events of the previous day. Mrs. Winters had loaned her a simple cotton dress, a bit short in the hem and loose in the bodice, but infinitely preferable to her ruined wedding gown. When she ventured downstairs, she found Grant already at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. He rose when she entered, a gesture of gentlemanly respect that she hadn't expected. Good morning, Miss Davis. I trust you slept well, better than I expected, thank you. Tabitha accepted the cup of coffee Mrs. Winters poured for her. Mr. Yates, I can't express my gratitude enough, but I should be on my way. I've imposed too much already. Grant frowned. And where exactly do you plan to go? The question brought Tabitha up short. She'd been so focused on escaping that she hadn't planned beyond that moment. I have a cousin in Denver. Perhaps she would take me in. Denver is a fair journey from here, Grant said carefully. "Do you have the means for such travel?" Tabitha's cheeks flushed. In her haste, she'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back, no money, no possessions. "I'll find work," she said with more confidence than she felt. Mrs. Winters snorted. "A young woman alone with no references, you know what kind of work you'd be offered." Grant cleared his throat. "Mrs. Winters, perhaps a bit of tact. Tact won't keep her safe, Grant." The older woman turned to Tabitha. "Miss Davis, I mean no disrespect, but the world is not kind to women without protection, especially beautiful women running from powerful men." Tabitha's shoulders slumped. "What would you have me do? Return to a forced marriage with a man who sees me as property?" "Certainly not," Grant interjected. "But Mrs. Winters is right about the dangers." He hesitated. "I have a proposition. I need help around the ranch. Mrs. Winters handles the cooking and house, but there's the garden, the chickens, the accounts. If you're willing to work, you can stay here. Earn your keep and save for your journey to Denver." Tabitha stared at him. "You would do that for a stranger?" Something flickered in Grant's eyes. "My mother was forced to marry a man she despised. I saw what it did to her spirit. I wouldn't wish that fate on anyone." Mrs. Winters nodded approvingly. "It's a fair offer, Miss Davis, and this ranch is remote enough that no one from town comes calling without purpose." Tabitha considered her limited options. Grant Yates seemed honorable, and Mrs. Winters' presence provided propriety. The alternative, setting out alone with no resources, was terrifying. "I accept your offer, Mr. Yates, and please call me Tabitha." Grant's smile was warm. "Then you must call me Grant." Over the following weeks, Tabitha settled into life at the Yates Ranch. The work was harder than anything she'd done before. Her upbringing as the daughter of a moderately successful shopkeeper hadn't prepared her for the physical demands of ranch life. Yet she found satisfaction in learning new skills, in watching seeds she'd planted sprout in the garden, in collecting eggs still warm from the hens. Grant proved to be a patient teacher and a fair employer. He paid her a modest but reasonable wage, which she carefully saved. Each evening, they would gather in the kitchen, sharing the day's events over Mrs. Winters' excellent cooking. Grant would sometimes read aloud from a book of poetry or one of the newspapers that arrived sporadically from town. It was a simple existence, but peaceful in a way Tabitha had never experienced. As the days turned to weeks, she found herself watching Grant when he wasn't aware, the way the sun highlighted the golden strands in his light brown hair, how his forearms flexed as he worked with the horses, the gentle way he handled even the most temperamental animals. One evening in late July, Tabitha was hanging laundry when she heard riders approaching. Fear seized her. Had Fleming's men found her? She dropped the sheet she was holding and hurried toward the house. Grant emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. His posture relaxed slightly as the riders came into view. "It's just Ben Miller and his boy," he told Tabitha, "neighbors from the next valley over." Still, Tabitha retreated to the house. She'd avoided all contact with visitors during her stay, fearful of word reaching Willow Creek. Through the window, she watched Grant greet the men, his manner friendly but reserved. After a brief conversation, the visitors departed. Grant found her in the kitchen, nervously kneading bread dough. "They're gone," he said gently. "Just wanted to borrow a tool." Tabitha nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Did they ask about me?" They noticed the laundry. "I said Mrs. Winters has a niece staying with us." Grant hesitated. "Tabitha, you can't hide forever." She punched down the dough with more force than necessary. "I know. But Fleming is not a man who forgives easily. My father told me stories." Grant stepped closer, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "What kind of stories?" "About women who refused him, men who crossed him in business. He's ruthless, Grant. And my father, he'll be equally furious, the humiliation I caused him." She shuddered. Grant's jaw tightened. "You're safe here, Tabitha. I won't let anyone hurt you." She looked up at him then, struck by the fierce protectiveness in his voice. Their eyes locked, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily over the past weeks. Grant cleared his throat and stepped back. I should check on the new calf, he murmured, leaving Tabitha alone with her thoughts and the lingering warmth of his almost touch. August brought scorching heat to the Montana landscape. The work was more demanding than ever as they battled to keep the garden and livestock watered. One particularly brutal afternoon, Grant suggested they take a break. "There's a swimming hole not far from here," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mrs. Winters is visiting her sister in town. Might be a good day to cool off." The propriety of swimming alone with Grant should have given Tabitha pause, but the heat had worn down her reservations. She changed into her oldest dress, one that wouldn't be ruined by water, and followed Grant down a winding path through a stand of aspens. The swimming hole was perfect, a deep, clear pool fed by a small waterfall. Cottonwood trees provided dappled shade around the edges. "It's beautiful," Tabitha breathed. Grant grinned. "Found it my first summer here, best kept secret on the property." He turned his back discreetly. "I'll keep my eyes averted while you get in." Tabitha waded into the water in her chemise and drawers, gasping at the delicious coolness. Grant joined her, wearing only his trousers. She tried not to stare at his broad chest, tanned golden by the sun, or the definition of muscles earned through hard work. They swam and splashed like children, their laughter echoing off the surrounding rocks. For a few precious hours, Tabitha forgot about Fleming, forgot about her father, forgot about everything except the joy of the moment and the man sharing it with her. As the afternoon waned, they sat side by side on sun-warmed rocks, letting the heat dry their clothes. "I haven't laughed like that in years," Tabitha admitted, wringing water from her long hair. Grant watched her, something unreadable in his expression. "You have a beautiful laugh, you should use it more often." Tabitha lowered her eyes. "I haven't had much cause for laughter lately." "Before all this," Grant gestured vaguely, "were you happy in Willow Creek?" Tabitha considered the question. "Content, perhaps, not happy. My mother died when I was 16. After that, my father became different, harsher. The gambling started and then the drinking. I spent most of my time keeping the house, trying to maintain appearances." "No suitors before Fleming?" Grant asked, then immediately looked chagrined. "Forgive me, that's too personal." "There was one," Tabitha admitted. "Samuel Porter, a schoolteacher, kind, thoughtful." "My father didn't approve, said a teacher would never provide the lifestyle I deserved." She laughed bitterly. "As if selling me to Fleming was providing for me." Grant's hand found hers on the rock, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "You deserved better." Tabitha's heart stuttered at his touch, at the sincerity in his voice. "As did your mother," she said softly. Grant's eyes darkened with old pain. "She died when I was 15, never knew if it was illness that took her or just giving up. My father was a hard man, cruel when drunk. I left home 2 days after we buried her." Tabitha turned her hand beneath his, lacing their fingers together. "I'm sorry." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, their hands still joined, neither acknowledging the significance of the touch nor willing to break it. It was nearly dusk when they returned to the ranch house. As they approached, Tabitha noticed something was wrong. The door stood ajar, when they had certainly closed it upon leaving. Grant motioned for her to stay back as he cautiously approached the house, retrieving his rifle from where it hung on the porch. He disappeared inside, re-emerging moments later with a grim expression. "Someone's been here," he said. "Nothing seems missing, but they went through everything, your room especially." Cold fear washed over Tabitha. "Fleming," she whispered. "He's found me." Grant's expression hardened. "Pack what you need, we'll leave at dawn." "Leave? But the ranch will still be here. Your safety matters more." Grant ran a hand through his hair. "I have a cabin high in the mountains. It was my first home when I came to Montana. It's remote, no one would think to look there." Tabitha's throat tightened with emotion. "You would leave your home for me?" Grant looked at her, his gaze intense. "Tabitha, he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Yes, I would." They spent a tense night, taking turns keeping watch. Tabitha packed her few belongings and helped Grant gather supplies. Before first light, they set out on horseback, Grant on Thunder and Tabitha on a gentle mare named Daisy. The journey took 2 days, following game trails and narrow paths that wound ever upward into the mountains. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was small but sturdy, nestled in a meadow surrounded by pine forest. A creek bubbled nearby and wildflowers dotted the clearing. "It's not much," Grant said as he dismounted, "but it's defensible. Only one approach and you can see for miles." Tabitha slid from Daisy's back, her muscles protesting after the long ride. "It's perfect." The cabin's interior was dusty but sound. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a small kitchen area and a table with 2 chairs occupying most of the main room. A narrow door led to a single bedroom. "You'll take the bedroom," Grant said firmly. "I'll sleep out here." Tabitha wanted to protest but was too exhausted. They spent the remainder of the day settling in cleaning, unpacking, and making the cabin habitable. By evening, a fire crackled in the hearth and the scent of rabbit stew filled the small space. "I'm sorry about Mrs. Winters," Tabitha said as they ate. "She'll be worried when she returns to find the ranch empty." Grant nodded. "I left her a letter. She'll understand. Will she?" "We left no forwarding destination. Mrs. Winters knows about this place. If she needs to find us, she can." Grant set his bowl aside. "But I'd rather she didn't have that information if anyone comes asking." The reality of their situation settled heavily between them. "How long can we stay here?" Tabitha asked. "As long as necessary." Grant's eyes met hers across the table. "Winter comes early in the mountains. Once the snow falls, this place is virtually inaccessible until spring thaw." Tabitha absorbed this information, "So we could be here for months." "Yes." Grant watched her carefully. "Does that frighten you?" She considered the question. "Not for the reasons you might think." Understanding dawned in Grant's eyes. They had been dancing around their growing feelings for weeks. Alone in this remote cabin with no one else for miles, maintaining the proper distance would be challenging. "I would never presume," Grant began. "I know," Tabitha interrupted. "You're an honorable man, Grant, that's why." She took a deep breath. "That's why I trust you with my life." "And my heart, if it comes to that." Grant's expression softened. "Tabitha!" A sound outside interrupted them, the unmistakable crack of a branch beneath a boot. Grant immediately extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness broken only by the fire's glow. He retrieved his rifle from beside the door, gesturing for Tabitha to stay down. "Could be an animal," he whispered. Tabitha nodded, but her racing heart knew better. They'd been found. Grant peered through a small window. 2 men, he confirmed grimly. "Armed." Tabitha's blood ran cold. "Fleming's men, stay here." Grant moved toward the door. "No." Tabitha grabbed his arm. "You can't face them alone." "I won't let them take you." The determination in Grant's voice was absolute. Before they could argue further, a voice called from outside. "Yates, we know you're in there." "Send out the Davis woman and no one needs to get hurt." Grant's jaw clenched. "Like hell," he muttered. Tabitha's mind raced. She couldn't let Grant risk his life for her. This was her problem, her fight. "I have an idea," she whispered, quickly outlining a plan. Grant shook his head. "Too dangerous." "Trust me," Tabitha pleaded. "I'm not going back to Fleming, not ever, but I won't have your blood on my hands either." After a moment of silent communication, Grant nodded reluctantly. Tabitha slipped through the cabin's back window while Grant called out to the men, keeping their attention focused on the front door. Using the skills she'd learned over the past months on the ranch, Tabitha moved silently through the underbrush, circling behind the intruders. The men stood with their attention fixed on the cabin, rifles ready. In the moonlight, she recognized one of them, Silas Burke, Fleming's foreman. Tabitha picked up a heavy branch and, saying a silent prayer, brought it down hard on the back of Burke's companion. The man crumpled with a muffled grunt. Burke whirled, but before he could raise his rifle, Grant burst from the cabin, his own weapon trained on the foreman. "Drop it," Grant ordered, his voice deadly calm. Burke hesitated, eyes darting between Grant's rifle and his fallen companion. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "Kick it away," Grant directed. Once Burke complied, Grant approached cautiously. "Now, you're going to tell me exactly how you found us." Burke spat on the ground, "Followed your trail from the ranch. Fleming's offering a substantial reward for the return of his bride." "I am not his bride," Tabitha said, stepping into view. "Nor will I ever be," Burke sneered. "That ain't for you to decide, missy. Fleming paid good money for you." Grant's expression darkened. "She's not property to be bought and sold. Tell that to her father. He was mighty pleased with the arrangement." Burke's gaze shifted to Tabitha. "Until you humiliated him in front of the whole town." "He's drinking himself to death now, you ungrateful." "That's enough," Grant interrupted, pressing the rifle barrel against Burke's chest. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your friend are going to ride back to Willow Creek with a message. Tell Fleming that Tabitha Davis is under my protection. If he wants her, he'll have to come through me." Burke laughed. "You think you can stand against Thomas Fleming? He owns half the territory, maybe so, but up here that means nothing." Grant's voice was steel. "Now get your friend and get off my mountain." After binding the men's hands and confiscating their weapons, Grant and Tabitha watched as they rode away, the unconscious man slumped over his saddle. "They'll be back," Tabitha said quietly once the riders had disappeared from view. "With more men." Grant nodded grimly. "Yes, but not tonight. And maybe not for some time." He turned to her. "Are you hurt?" Tabitha shook her head. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving her shaky and cold. "My father. Do you think what Burke said is true?" Grant's expression softened. He guided her back inside the cabin, closing and barring the door behind them. "Men like Burke say whatever they think will cause the most pain. Don't let his words take root." As they rekindled the fire, Tabitha found herself trembling uncontrollably. Grant hesitated only a moment before wrapping his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. "You were incredibly brave," he murmured against her hair. Tabitha closed her eyes, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I was terrified, but I couldn't let them take me back. And I couldn't let you face them alone." Grant pulled back slightly, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "When I saw you step out of the shadows holding that branch, I've never been so proud or so scared that I might lose you before I ever really had you." The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. Tabitha's breath caught. "Grant, I know it's too soon. I know you're still running from a man who tried to claim you against your will. The last thing I want is to be another man who—" Tabitha silenced him by rising on tiptoes and pressing her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Grant remained frozen. Then, with a soft groan, he returned the kiss, one hand cradling her face with exquisite tenderness. When they finally parted, both breathless, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I found you in my barn," he admitted. Tabitha smiled. "Even in that ruined wedding dress, especially then." Grant's thumb traced her cheekbone. "You looked like some wild, beautiful spirit. I thought I was dreaming." They spent the night by the fire, talking in low voices about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. As dawn broke over the mountains, Grant took Tabitha's hands in his. "I need to say something, and I need you to know that you owe me no response." His eyes were earnest, vulnerable. "I love you, Tabitha Davis, not because I rescued you, or because circumstances threw us together, but because of who you are, your courage, your kindness, your strength. I would wait for you forever if that's what you need." Tears filled Tabitha's eyes. "I don't need forever, I've known for weeks now." She squeezed his hands. "I love you too, Grant Yates." As the sun climbed higher, they made plans. They would stay in the mountains until the first heavy snow, then make their way south, not to Denver but to California, where Fleming's reach didn't extend. Grant would sell the ranch, using the proceeds to start a new life together. "What about Mrs. Winters?" Tabitha asked. Grant smiled. "She has a sister in San Francisco. She's been talking about joining her for years." "And your horses? Thunder, he comes with us, along with Daisy, their family." Grant's expression grew serious. "I can't promise it will be easy, starting over never is. But I can promise you won't face it alone." Tabitha thought of the girl who had run from the church 3 months ago, terrified and alone. She barely recognized that version of herself now. "I'm not afraid of hard work or challenges, not anymore." Grant pulled her into his arms. "One more thing." He reached into his pocket, producing a simple gold band. "This was my mother's, the only thing of hers I kept. It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Tabitha whispered, tears blurring her vision as Grant slipped the ring onto her finger. "Tabitha Davis, will you marry me?" "Not because anyone is forcing you or because society demands it, but because you choose to freely and completely." Tabitha looked at the ring glinting in the early morning light, then up at Grant's hopeful face. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Grant Yates." Their second kiss was a promise not made in a church before witnesses, but perhaps more binding for having been made in the wilderness, with only the mountains as their witnesses. A promise of partnership, of respect, of love freely given and received. Outside, the sun shone on a new day, the mountains standing sentinel around them not as a prison, but as protectors of the life they would build together. A life that had begun when a runaway bride hid in the shadows of a barn, and a cowboy found her and promised forever.